There are lots of theories on who King Arthur might really have been, and really there's no clear answer. We know the basic elements of the story, but the man himself remains a mystery.
In a sterile lab, a machine finishes its sequence. Scientists stare at the screen, unable to believe the results. The sample came from a charred bone found miles deep in a mysterious Welsh cave locals have linked to King Arthur for centuries. They were looking for Ice Age data. Instead, they found a 5th century warrior. And the DNA profile? It's a direct match to the most elite high-status families of sub-Roman Britain. A legend everyone thought was myth just got a biological footprint. The search for the real King Arthur is over. Science finds a ghost. For over 1,000 years, the name King Arthur has been magic. It's a name that lingers between myth and history, a symbol of a lost golden age. We all know the stories, the shining towers of Camelot, the sword pulled from a stone, the knights gathered around a table where no man sat above another. These images are burned into our imagination. But for just as long, historians have shaken their heads. They found nothing. No grave, no crown, no battlefield they could definitively mark with his name. The earliest written references came centuries after he supposedly lived. To put it mildly, the trail was ice cold, until now. The thing nobody tells you about history is that it's buried right under our feet, waiting for the right tools to find it. The story starts not with a historian, but with a team of paleoclimatologists in a remote, mist-covered part of Wales. They were studying a cave system known to locals as Ogof Arthur, literally Arthur's Cave. Folklore claimed the king and his warriors slept within, waiting for a call to rise again. The scientists weren't there for legends. They were there for cave deposits, trying to map climate change from the last ice age. They were working deep inside, hundreds of feet from the entrance, in a chamber the public never sees. And that's where they found it. Tucked into a narrow cleft hidden behind a rockfall was a small recessed area. It wasn't natural. It looked deliberate. Inside were fragments of human bones. They were charred, suggesting a ritual burning. At first, the team was confused. This didn't look like an Ice Age burial. They sent a small fragment for radiocarbon dating. The results that came back were a bombshell. The bones weren't 10,000 years old. They were dated to around the year 520 AD, plus or minus 30 years. This placed them in the exact window of the historical King Arthur, the time when a Romano-British leader was said to be fighting the Saxon invaders. Suddenly, the project changed. Geneticists were called in. Now you see, extracting DNA from bones this old is next to impossible. It's like trying to read a book that's been shredded and left in the rain for 15 centuries. The DNA strands break down, and worse, they get contaminated by everything that touches them. Bacteria, fungi, even the breath of the archaeologists. But the team got lucky. The cave's deep, cool, and stable environment had acted like a refrigerator, and they found the one bone that's a miracle for a DNA scientist, the petrous bone. This tiny, dense piece of skull behind the ear is the hardest in the human body. It's a genetic vault. In a sterile, clean room, technicians in full-body suits drilled into the bone and extracted a tiny pinch of powder. They dissolved it, isolated the ancient DNA, and began the long process of sequencing. What many overlooked was that this process could take months. The team waited. When the results came in, the lab was stunned. They had a profile. Not just mitochondrial DNA from the mother's side, but nuclear DNA from both parents. They had the genetic blueprint of a man who lived and perished in Britain's darkest age. They immediately ran this profile against a global database of ancient DNA. And this is where the story goes from interesting to world-changing. The man in the cave belonged to a Y chromosome haplogroup, a genetic clan passed from father to son. That is incredibly rare. It's almost exclusive to Western Britain, but it got even more specific. The profile was a near-perfect match to genetic markers found in other known elite high-status burials from the sub-Roman period. This wasn't a farmer. This wasn't a lost Roman soldier. This was, without a doubt, a member of the native British aristocracy. A warlord, a prince, a man whose genetic signature was woven into the very royal bloodlines that centuries later would claim direct descent from King Arthur himself. For the first time, the myth and the science were telling the same story. But how could they be sure? And what else was hiding in that cave? The king who wasn't there to understand why this DNA discovery is so massive, you have to understand the sheer frustrating emptiness of the search for Arthur. For centuries, people have tried to prove he was real, and for centuries they have failed. It's a cold case that's 1,500 years old. You see, the problem starts with the sources. The first writer to mention the man who might be Arthur was a monk named Gildas, writing around the year 540 AD, very close to Arthur's time. Gildas wrote a fiery sermon about the fall of Britain. He mentions a great victory at a place called the Battle of Badon Hill, where the Britons, led by a remarkable man, stopped the Saxon advance for a generation. But here's the kicker. Gildas never names him. He only names the man who led after him, Ambrosius Aurelianus. The first person to finally attach a name is a Welsh historian named Nennius, about 300 years later. Nennius gives a list of 12 battles fought by a dux bellorum, a duke of battles named Arthur. This is where the legend truly begins. But 300 years is a long time. It's the difference between us and the American Revolution. How much of it was real history and how much was campfire story? Then, in the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote his History of the Kings of Britain. This book was a medieval blockbuster. Geoffrey gave us everything: Arthur's magical conception with Uther Pendragon, the prophet Merlin, the sword Caliburn, later Excalibur, and his final tragic departure to the Isle of Avalon. The problem? Geoffrey was a great storyteller, but a terrible historian. He invented most of it, mixing Welsh legends with his own wild imagination. This created a massive problem for modern searchers. Were they looking for a real 5th century warlord or a fictional 12th century king? The most famous search, of course, was at Glastonbury Abbey. In the year 1191, monks at the abbey made a stunning announcement. They claimed they had found the tomb of King Arthur and his queen Guinevere. They said they dug 7 feet down and found a massive hollowed-out log coffin. Inside were the bones of a huge man, well over 6 feet tall, with a damaged skull, and the bones of a woman with golden hair. Above them, they said, was a lead cross with a clear inscription, "Here lies interred the famous King Arthur, with Guinevere, his second wife, in the Isle of Avalon." It was a sensation. Pilgrims flocked to the site. Money poured in. But what many overlooked is that the abbey had just burned down in a terrible fire. They were broke. They needed a tourist attraction, and they got one. Today, almost every historian agrees. The Glastonbury grave was a hoax, a brilliant medieval fundraising scheme. The bones were lost, the cross vanished. It was another dead end. Then there was Tintagel Castle in Cornwall. Geoffrey of Monmouth claimed this was where Arthur was conceived. In the 1990s, archaeologists dug there and found something incredible. They found massive amounts of high-status Mediterranean pottery, glass, and wine jars from the 5th and 6th centuries. This proved Tintagel was the stronghold of a very wealthy, very powerful British ruler who was trading with the remnants of the Roman Empire. It was the right time, the right place, the right status. But just like with Gildas, there was no name, no inscription, no Arthur was here. People looked everywhere. Cadbury Castle, a massive Iron Age hill fort, was excavated because it too was refortified in the 5th century and matched descriptions of Camelot. They found defenses, halls, but no Arthur. The man himself remained a ghost. All these searches found was a shadow, the shadow of a powerful king, but not the king. This is why the Welsh cave is so different. Glastonbury gave us a story. Tintagel gave us pottery. The cave gave us a body. It gave us a genetic code from the exact right time, with the exact right ancestry. It is the first piece of human evidence that connects the legend to a real, breathing person. But was this person alone? The DNA was just the beginning of what the cave held. More than just a grave. The cave itself, Ogof Arthur, is a character in this story. To understand the discovery, you have to understand the place. This isn't some tiny hole in a hill, it's a sprawling ancient network of passages that plunge deep into the Welsh mountainside. For as long as anyone can remember, this place has been steeped in folklore. Locals have stories their grandmothers told them, stories of a sleeping king. They say that Arthur and his knights were not ended in their final battle. Instead, a wounded Arthur was brought here by Merlin. They were laid to rest in a hidden chamber, a place where time doesn't flow. The legend says they are preserved, not departed, surrounded by their treasure, waiting for the day Britain is in its greatest peril. On that day, they will wake, ride out from the cave, and save the kingdom one last time. It's a fantastic story. And of course, scientists paid it no mind. For them, Ogof Arthur was important for a different reason: the Ice Age. You see, the first official excavations happened back in the 1870s. Victorian gentlemen in top hats digging with shovels and pickaxes tore through the cave floor. They weren't delicate, but they found amazing things. They found the bones of woolly mammoths, of cave bears, and woolly rhinos. They found tools made by Neanderthals over 40,000 years ago. The cave was a gold mine of prehistory. It proved this dark, wet place had been a shelter for tens of thousands of years. But the thing nobody tells you is that those Victorians were messy. They destroyed as much as they found. They mixed up layers, tossed aside bones they didn't care about, and completely missed the subtle clues. When the new team of scientists arrived, they were using modern, almost surgical techniques. They were there to re-examine the Ice Age layers to correct the mistakes of the past. They set up their lights deep in the cave system, far beyond the public entrance, in a section of passage known for its complex geology. And they noticed something the Victorians had missed: a pile of rocks that looked unnatural. It wasn't a random roof collapse. The stones seemed stacked. It was a cairn, a man-made marker. It was hiding the entrance to a small side chamber barely 3 feet high. This is where the story gets a chill. The team carefully removed the stones. The chamber behind was small, about 10 feet by 10 feet, and it was clear this was not an Ice Age site. This was a tomb. The charred bones of the warlord were at the center. But there was more. Around the bones, placed in a careful circle, were other items. There were fragments of a high-status drinking vessel, the kind an elite warrior would use for wine or mead. There were rusted fragments of what looked like a shield boss, the metal center of a wooden shield. And there were carved antler pins, used to hold a heavy wool cloak, the uniform of a wealthy British warlord. This wasn't just a body. This was a burial. An honored one. Someone had taken great care to place this man here in this secret, dark, and sacred place. What's more, the chamber itself was special. The scientists realized that this part of the cave was acoustically unique. A sound made inside the tiny chamber would echo and amplify through the entire cave system. It was a place of power. This changes the context completely. The local folklore about a sleeping king in a hidden chamber, suddenly it doesn't sound so crazy. It sounds like a memory passed down for 1,500 years of a real warlord who was laid to rest in a real hidden chamber deep inside this very cave. The legend wasn't just a story, it was a piece of oral history, a map that pointed the way. The man in the cave wasn't just any aristocrat. He was important enough to be remembered for over 1,000 years, even if his name was eventually replaced by the most famous name of all, Arthur. But the bones and artifacts weren't the strangest things they found. The walls themselves had a message: figure with the sword. The DNA proved who the man was. The artifacts proved his status. But the walls of the chamber, they hinted at what he believed. And this, to put it mildly, is a head-scratcher. After the bones were carefully removed for study, the team brought in imaging specialists. They used a technique called reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI. This is a high-tech method where they take hundreds of pictures of a surface with a light source moving in every tiny direction. The computer then stitches all these images together. The result? You can see carvings, etchings, and scratches that are completely invisible to the naked eye, and the walls of the tomb were covered in them. What they found was a shocking mix of symbols from two different competing worlds. On one side of the chamber near the entrance were crosses, dozens of them. They were small, simple, and etched into the limestone. These were unmistakably Christian symbols, the mark of the new faith that was sweeping across post-Roman Britain. This makes sense. The legends, after all, paint Arthur as a Christian king, a defender of the faith against the pagan Saxons. But on the other side of the tomb, the side where the man's head had been laid, the symbols were very different. They were older, more primal. There were spiral patterns, or triskelions, which are classic Celtic and pre-Christian designs. These are symbols of the sun, of the life cycle, of the old gods. And then there was the most baffling image of all. Near the back of the chamber, carved with deep, deliberate strokes, was a single figure. It was a simple stick figure, but the posture was clear. It was a human shape holding its arm aloft, and in its hand was a long, thin object, a sword. The figure wasn't in a posture of fighting. It was in a posture of offering, or perhaps of power, like a king raising his blade to his people. Or, as one researcher nervously joked, like someone pulling a sword from a stone. What many overlooked is that this combination of symbols is the real prize. The 5th century was a time of chaos and change. The old Roman paganism was dying, the new Christianity was rising, and the ancient Celtic beliefs of the Druids were still whispering in the shadows. This tomb captured that exact moment of collision. This warlord was clearly a man of two worlds. He was buried with the symbols of the new Christian God, but also with the ancient magic of his ancestors. He was a transitional figure, bridging the gap between the old and the new. This is exactly the figure that the legend of Arthur describes. A Roman Briton, a Christian, yet also a king steeped in the magic of Merlin and the old ways. The cave, it seems, wasn't just a grave, it was a shrine. The crosses and carvings suggest people may have returned here, perhaps for years or decades after the man's passing, to light torches and pay their respects. They were visiting the tomb of a great leader. The discovery of the carvings, combined with the elite DNA and the ancient folklore, paints an astonishing picture. We have a warlord from the right time with the right social status, buried in a secret chamber in a cave already named for Arthur, and surrounded by symbols of both Christian and pagan power that perfectly match the themes of the Arthurian legend. It seems too perfect. And that's exactly what has the skeptics talking. The man in the shadow. So, is this it? Is this the moment the search ends? Have they really truly found a blood relative of King Arthur? This is the point in the story where we have to hit the pause button. We have to step back from the flickering torchlight of that cave and talk directly, to look at what the critics, the academics, and the professional skeptics are saying. Because as you can imagine, while the internet is going crazy over this, the mainstream scientific community is hitting the brakes. Hard. And their objections aren't just sour grapes, they are powerful, logical, and based on decades of mistakes made by people who, just like us, wanted to believe. The contamination nightmare. The number one concern? The single biggest monster that haunts this entire discovery? Contamination. Ancient DNA, or a DNA, is not like the neat, tidy samples you see on a TV crime show. It is, to put it bluntly, dirty. The DNA molecule is a fragile thing. After 1,500 years in a damp, non-frozen environment, it shatters into millions of tiny, unreadable pieces. What's left is a soup of genetic information, and 99% of it isn't human. It's bacteria, it's fungus, it's the DNA of the worms, the water, the plants. The critics argue that finding a human signal in that soup is a miracle, and finding a specific human signal is next to impossible. They argue that even in a state-of-the-art clean room with researchers in full-body suits, a single stray skin cell from a lab tech, a particle of dandruff, or even a breath could have landed on the bone. Worse, what about the tomb itself? This isn't a sealed pyramid, it's a cave. Archaeologists have been in and out of there for decades. Locals have been telling stories about it for centuries. What if the DNA they found doesn't belong to the 6th century warlord, but to an 18th century shepherd who got lost? Or even more likely, what if it belongs to the very first archaeologist who poked his head into the tomb in 1953? If that happened, the elite genetic profile might not be from the 1,500-year-old bone at all. It could be from, well, from anyone. Now, the team that did the work swears by their protocols. They will tell you they used negative controls, meaning they also tested the dirt around the bone, and it came back clean of this specific profile. They'll tell you the DNA was clearly degraded, showing the specific kind of shattering and chemical damage that only ancient DNA has. Modern contaminant DNA would look pristine by comparison. But the doubt is still there. It's a shadow in the corner of the lab. Did they really find Arthur's bloodline? Or did they just find the DNA of the guy who packed the box? The ghost in the static theory. The second big problem is interpretation bias. This is a very fancy scientific way of saying we see what we want to see. When you are hunting for a ghost, every cold draft becomes a spirit. Every creak in the floorboards becomes a footstep. When you are hunting for Arthur, the same rule applies. Think about it. We want to find Arthur. So when we find a crude stick figure on a wall holding a line, our brain immediately fills in the blanks. We see a king holding a sword. But a skeptic? A skeptic looks at the same carving and sees a stick figure holding a spear, or a torch, or just a stick. This bias, they argue, taints all the evidence. Let's look at those carvings again. The team sees a perfect snapshot of Arthur's world, the Celtic spirals of the old pagan ways right next to the new Christian crosses. A clash of worlds. But the critics see something much simpler. Graffiti. A skeptic would argue that there is zero proof those carvings were made at the same time. What if the Celtic spirals were carved in 200 BC by an ancient Briton, and the cross was carved in 900 AD by a traveling monk who used the cave for shelter, and the king with the sword was carved by a bored teenager in 1400 AD? Suddenly, it's not a clash of worlds, it's just a random assortment of markings from different time periods, signifying nothing. The same goes for the artifacts. A shield boss? A cloak pin? Yes, they prove the man was a warrior, but do they prove he was a king? Critics argue this is a massive leap. This could have been a captain, a well-respected lieutenant, a bodyguard. Britain was a violent place. A man with a shield and a nice pin was not rare. We are projecting royalty onto him because his bones are in a cave that legends call a tomb. The so what problem. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most devastating critique. It's the so what question. Let's give the team everything. Let's say the DNA is 100% real and uncontaminated. Let's say the radiocarbon date of 520 AD is perfect. Let's say the artifacts prove he was an elite high-status warlord. So what? Britain in the year 520 AD was full of elite warlords. The Roman Empire had collapsed. It was an age of total chaos. It was a battle royale with dozens of petty kings, chieftains, and strongmen fighting for control of every valley and river. History remembers a few names like Vortigern or Ambrosius Aurelianus, who many historians already believe was the real Arthur. Finding one of these warlords doesn't mean you found Arthur, it just means you found a warlord. This is the one of many Arthurs theory. This theory suggests that Arthur wasn't even a name. It might have been a title, a nickname. The word for bear in Welsh is arth. It could be that Arthur was just what they called the top commander, the bear man. If that's true, there could have been dozens of Arthurs all over Britain. So is the whole thing just wishful thinking? Did this entire discovery just happen overnight? Are we missing a key detail? The thing is, the skeptics are right to be cautious. Their logic is sound. But what they are missing, what they are conveniently ignoring, is the power of combination. Any one of these clues on its own would be meaningless. A weird bit of DNA? Contamination? A strange carving? Graffiti? A set of old bones? Just another dead soldier. That's been the story of the last 100 years of searching. But this cave gives us everything at once. You have a cave that is already steeped in centuries of specific local folklore about a sleeping king in a hidden chamber. You have a set of bones in a formal tomb, which are then radiocarbon dated to the exact narrow window of the historical Arthur. Not 800 AD, not 100 BC, but precisely the era of the Great Battle of Mount Badon. You have high-status artifacts in that tomb, the cloak pin, the shield boss, that confirm the high status of a warrior buried as a leader. You have DNA taken from those exact bones that confirms this person belonged to the rare, elite, native British royal bloodlines that predate the Romans, the Angles, and the Saxons. And you have carvings on the wall from the same period that show a perfect match for the legend's core themes. The clash of the old pagan world and the new Christian one, and the unmistakable symbol of a leader with a sword. It is not one clue. It is the stack of clues. The skeptics want you to believe that this is all a coincidence, that by pure chance a local legend about a king's tomb grew up around a random cave that just happened to contain the tomb of a real warlord who just happened to die at the exact moment Arthur was alive, who just happened to have the exact genetic profile of a native king, and who just happened to be buried next to carvings that match his life story. The chances of all of these separate, specific, and unrelated things coming together by pure coincidence are, to put it mildly, astronomically small. To believe in that much coincidence, you have to believe in a different kind of magic. So, no, this discovery does not mean the bones in that cave belong to a man named Arthur who had a wizard named Merlin and pulled a sword from a stone. That's the myth. But what it does mean is that the myth is not just fiction, it is a powerful, distorted memory of a real age, of real men. It's the memory of elite, Christian pagan warlords of royal British bloodlines who fought and perished in the chaos of the 5th and 6th centuries and who were buried as heroes in sacred hidden places. The legend of King Arthur, it turns out, wasn't a fairy tale. It was a biography. A biography of a real man, or perhaps a whole class of men, whose genetic legacy has been waiting in the dark for 15 centuries. And we just found it. The line between myth and history just got thinner than ever. What do you think? Is this the closest we'll ever get to the real King Arthur? Or is it all just a coincidence? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see more mysteries uncovered, be sure to like and subscribe.